Okay, here we are on problem number 3, and I am not going to do the equation and stuff like that. I am going to show you what happens to these graphs. I'm going to go ahead and make a table by hand just to show you 3 to the x minus 1, and that is y. So I'm going to show you this really quick because this will help you next time you take algebra, which will be 2 years. But so x is -2, -1, 0, 1, 2. And so 3 to the -2 minus 1 turns out to be -0.89. And 3 to the -1, which is a fraction, that's why you get those decimals there, minus 1, again, is going to be -0.67. So it's like those are repeating numbers. And then 3 to the 0 minus 1. So 3 to the 0 is 1, minus 1 is 0. Then you have 3 to the 1 minus 1, so that's 3 minus 1 is 2. And then you have 3 squared minus 1, so that's 9 minus 1, that's 8. And so here's your numbers. Now, just by looking at this, I can still tell you that B is 3 and A is still 1. We have not changed A yet. This number here, notice it is the same all the way down. This number is the shift of the graph, and when you shift it, it's going up or down, because in this case, it's going down 1. But that is something you don't have to memorize, so you just plug it in your calculator and plug these points in. So -2, -1-ish down here. -1, negative a little higher than -1, so -2/3, like, so -1, -2/3. And then you have 0, 0. So we don't have 0, 1 this time because there's a shift. And then you have 1, 2. 1, 2 is right there. And 2, 8. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so your graph this time is like this, because those points were supposed to be a little higher. The delicacies of the stylus are not that great. So there's your graph, and I would say B is 3, my graph's going up, that's a growth. Domain, arrows on each end, all reals. The range is what has changed. The A did not change. A is still 1, but this -1 made the graph shift down 1. So the range is now going to be greater than, it's still greater than, it's still going up, but it's going to be greater than -1. It's approaching -1 and not touching it. So that means that's the asymptote as well. So the range and the asymptote are going to be the same thing. One is greater than for the range, because that's where the graph goes, and asymptote is the line, the boundary line, so that's the equals. So y equals -1, and I'll go ahead and make that another color so you can see the asymptote. Y equals -1. And then the y-intercept this time, I'll go ahead and keep it green so you can see the y-intercept this time is where x is 0, so it is 0, 0. So you can get everything from these graphs. If you graph it in your graphing calculator, you can get it from the table, which I am going to go through one example on your graphing calculator at the end of this. This one, I am not going to go through this move up because I want to show you in another one. So let me skip number 4 and jump down to something that has a different A. I'm going to do number 5. I'm probably going to do 5 and 6. So each different type. So number 5, I'm going to go ahead and make my table again. I have x, and I have 1/4 times, see, it doesn't like those. I don't know why it's doing that. Okay. Times, oh, it's not wanting to do that. Why do you keep doing that, messing with me? Okay. Times 2 to the x and y. So I'm going to show you what it looks like, and then I'm going to show you the answer. So we have our -2, -1, 0, 1, 2. We have 1/4 times 2 to the -2. And when you plug that in your calculator, you're going to get, that's actually 1/4 times 1/4, which is 1/16, which we did on the other page, 0.0625. 1/4 times 2 to the -1, which is 1/4 times 1/2, which is 1/8, which is 0.125. Notice these are very small numbers, and that's what happens when you do exponents. You get very large, very small numbers, even though we're using 1s and 2s. Those are pretty small numbers. This one's good. 1/4 times 2 to the 0. That's helpful because 2 to the 0 is 1. So this is 1/4, and I think you can see a pattern forming here. Then you have 1/4 times 2 to the 1. So that's 1/2. And 1/4 times 2 squared, which is 1/4 times 4, which is 1. So I'm going to go ahead and graph this now. I got -2 and these tiny little numbers. So I'm really close to 0. -1, still pretty close to 0. 0, also close to 0. 1 is at 1/2, which I've already actually kind of drawn. And 2 is at 1. So this is a crazy graph. It's actually going to go, if I did 3, I'll go ahead and put 3 in there so you can see it, 1/4. Because of this 1/4, it's kind of shrinking. So it's 1/4 times 2 to the 3rd, and 2 to the 3rd is 8. So 8 times 1/4 is 2. So 3 is going to be 2. So I don't know if you can see this. It does still have that same pattern. Eventually they're going to get bigger. But this is what it looks like. So let's talk about this over here. So first we're going to say b equals 2. B is the base, don't forget. A equals that 1/4. A equals that 1/4. And so I'm going to just leave that alone for a minute here. We didn't add anything, so we didn't shift. It is going up, so it is a growth. The b is 2, it's greater than 0. It's a growth. You can tell by looking at it or looking at the b. Make sure you get the right b. Domain, still all reals all the time. The range. So the range we find by looking at the graph, looking at it's approaching 0. So the range, I should not have circled that. That's for the y-intercept. It's 0. This one's greater than 0. And the asymptote, that's what I was talking about. Y equals 0. So it did not shift. The intercept is the 1/4 here. That's the intercept that I was talking about. 0, 1/4. Right there. And you can see it in your table. You can see it in the table in a graphing calculator too. Wherever x is 0, that is your intercept. And since it didn't shift, it's staying the same. On this next one, for 6 here, we're going to see that there is a shift. There is a shift. I don't want to shift my paper. Okay, there is a shift right there, that -3. So our graph is going to go down 3. And that is going to affect our intercept because we are shifting the graph. We'll go ahead and show, I'm just going to go ahead and fill in this table and show you what these are. When you plug in our numbers, just use those same numbers. They're the easiest to use. When you plug in -2, you get 17. When you plug in -1, you get 7. 0 is 2. 1 is -1/2. That's a -0.5. I don't know if you can see that. -0.5 and -1.75. Okay, when we graph them, -217, well, that's way up there. -1.7, I can do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. When I get 0, it's at 2. 1 is at -1/2. 1 -1/2 right there. And 2 at -1.75. 2 -1.75. It is approaching -2 there. But if I put in another number, it would get even closer. It's actually going to go down a little bit more. Well, there's not going to do that. So I don't know why it does it sometimes and sometimes not. Okay. Okay, so there we go. And I'll draw it. Oh, I totally messed that up. Okay. Now, okay. So let's do this. B equals 1/2. B is the base. The x is on the B. A is 5. A is 5. Now 5 is affected by that -3 over here, this change, this shift down 3. So looking at the graph, well, first the domain, all reals, but looking at the graph, I can see that this graph is above that -3. So that right there tells you where your graph is going. And that's also your asymptote. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that in and put that in because we're talking about that right now. So that is y equals -3. And then your y-intercept, looking back at the table, your y-intercept is 0, 2, which we have right there. So when you have a shift, the A is not going to be your y-intercept. It's only when there's no shift. So if there's a shift, you're going to have to take that shift. And so you can see 5 minus 3 is 2. 5 minus the 3, minus that shift, is 2. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is show you how to do one of these on your graphing calculator. Okay, here we are at the graphing calculator portion of this lesson. And I am going to be doing number 4 that we skipped from the notes so that you can see what these graphs look like when you put them in your graphing calculator and how you can get the information from them. So I have, the first thing I'm going to do is show you the function. So you go to y equals, and we put the function in. And put parentheses. Please put parentheses around those fractions. 1 divided by 3 is a fraction, and that's how we've been doing it the whole time. Use the caret for your exponent if you need to. Click on this x right here. And then in this particular function, I have to arrow over because I want to get off that exponent, and I'm going to be adding 4. So that's what this graph, this function looks like. 1/3 to the x plus 4. All right. All right. And the next thing we're going to do is hit graph. So you can see what it looks like. There's our nice function. Now, this is a decay function because you can see it starts high and goes low. So it's a decay. Also, by looking at your y equals, b is 1/3. b is 1/3 here. This +4 at the end is your shift, +4. So I'm going to look at the graph again. It went up 4 places. That also tells you, so this +4 also tells you the y, the range and the asymptote. Range and asymptote are this number right here, graph. The range, see how it's 1, 2, 3, 4? There's where your line is. That's your asymptote, y equals 4. And your range is y is greater than 4. So we're getting all kinds of information just looking at this graph. You plug it into your y equals and you graph it, and you can get it from your equation without plotting any points. But we do need to find the intercept. I think it's going to be 0, 5. Let's check. So I don't know if you can see that on my little thing, but I have to do second graph is table. So I'm going to look at the table and look at that. My x is 0, my y is 5. That's my y-intercept. And that's basically all you have to do when you have a graphing calculator. I do want to see tables. So look, they have these numbers right here, and I can go up in this table and get all of these numbers, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2. I can get all those numbers to fill in a table from the graphing calculator table. I am fine with you doing that. I want you to show me these points, these 5 points on a graph. So if you have a graphing calculator, feel free to use it. Get all your information from it, though. You have to be able to fill everything in and graph. Graph the 5 points and then sketch the graph through those 5 points. So -2 is way up there. Where was that at? That was at -2 was at 13. And then -1 is about 6-ish. Let's see what it says on the table. 7, -1, 7. 0 is at 5, 1 is at 4.3, and notice how they are all approaching 4. Look how close they're getting to 4, and those decimals go forever. So that's what happens here with this graph. It's approaching 4 at the asymptote, but it doesn't touch it. And that's all I've got for you today. Make sure you ask questions. I know this can be a little confusing. And I will be doing another video before we take our quiz on Friday. And also I'm going to take questions about anything you want concerning the work and the task and everything on Wednesday. When you sign up for the task meeting, I'm also going to be taking questions about anything to do with the topics for our quiz. So thank you very much.